Pastor Suzy Burba here from First Congregational Church of Braintree in Massachusetts, and I welcome you to this week's edition of Food for the Soul. I come to you today from Castle Island in South Boston, and this is the oldest fortified military site in British North America. An interesting little tidbit is that nobody knows how it got the name Castle Island. Looking behind me, you would think that name kind of makes sense, but this wasn't built till quite a deal later, and even before its first fort was constructed, which was in 1643, it had the name Castle Island. So that's a little bit of a mystery. Jumping ahead to the Revolutionary War, the British troops had a fort here. And when they realized things weren't going too well for them and decided to get out of town, they destroyed the fort that they had, thinking they didn't want the site to be used by Patriot forces. Nice effort, because General George Washington ordered that a new fort be built, and he placed Colonel Paul Revere in charge of that fort. So, a couple of names that you've heard of before. After the Revolution, for a while this remained in control of the federal government, but then they handed it over to the state of Massachusetts. And at that time, it was used as a prison. That didn't last a whole heck of a long time, because in 1798, the government took back control of the fort and re-fortified it once again. And an interesting little tidbit, at that point it was named Fort Independence. When I came to you early in the summer from Fort Revere's original name was Fort Independence, but then that name got transferred here and Fort Revere became Fort Revere. So we're going to move around and take a look at a couple of spots here. This current pentagonal-shaped structure is actually the 8th fort constructed on the site. And we do have a sketch remaining of that. This sketch, which we'll show you now, was drawn in 1809 by Lieutenant Lewis Peckman. I'm going to share a little bit more about Peckman in a bit. He has an interesting story. So, though drawn in 1809, the fort wasn't constructed until 1834 to 51. And we got a lot of granite going on here. It was actually made with 172,687 linear feet of hammered granite. It's a lot of granite. Glad I'm not the one to do the hammering. Legend has it that in its 377 years of history, the fort's cannons were only fired once in anger. You can see here a couple of cannons sticking out from the top of the fort. So on March 20th, 1776, British troops fired upon a party in Dorchester Point, but the point was out of range. Their cannon exploded, injuring 7 of their own men. Whoops. I thought I would give you a look at a bit of the view here from Castle Island, and I'm going to share with you stories about 2 different soldiers who had been stationed here. The first is, I believe it was Lieutenant Edgar Allen Perry. So he was only here for maybe 6 months, but in his time, he, like the other soldiers, would have heard stories about when this site was a state prison. And Perry, who was later known as Edgar Allan Poe, a name you've heard of, incorporated some of these stories into his short story, The Cask of Amontillado. I'm not familiar with the story, but it touches on his experiences here. And the second soldier, who I've already named, Lieutenant Lewis Peckman. He's the one that drew the sketch of the fort a good deal of time before it was built, but it was his sketch. So I don't know what kind of soldier he was. I'm assuming he wasn't too bad. He was promoted to captain, but his personal life was a bit of a mess. His wife, Salinda, took out ads in 2 newspapers, one in Maine and one in Pennsylvania, to spread the word as a warning to humanity, especially women, about the conduct and character of Mr. Peckman. So I will read for you. This is just a part of her ad, I guess you call it. It's really quite interesting. She writes, "Beware of a monster. Whereas Louis Peckman, late a captain in the 4th Regiment U.S. Infantry in the service of the United States, my lawful wedded husband, without any just cause or reason has deserted my bed and board, although painful to me, I do denounce him as a liar and a villain, a person not to be trusted by either sex. He is despised by his comrades and pitied by his acquaintance. His unfeeling conduct towards me, I have to caution all young females as well as old women to beware of this monster wherever he may go." She continues, "I therefore think it is duty incumbent upon me to caution all female society to have no connection whatsoever with this monster. He is a destroyer of happiness, but I trust in God that he will some future day receive a full compensation for his villainous conduct towards me." The Peckmans did divorce in 1818. So there you have a little bit of the history of Castle Island, info about it, and now we will move on to our reflection. That strange but interesting story about Lieutenant Peckman got me thinking about holy living. That is, living and conducting ourselves in a manner that is worthy of calling ourselves Christians. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 15 and 16 says, "As he who called you is holy, be holy yourselves in all your conduct. For it is written, 'You shall be holy as I am holy.'" That is a quote from a passage in Leviticus. This idea of holy living might seem a little odd or ambiguous to our modern ears. So to put it in more common language, you can think of it as moral, respectable, faithful living. Being holy means to live a life set apart for God, for service to God. And this doesn't mean later, sometime in the future when you have things figured out better. That's a time that doesn't necessarily come. Maybe improvement. It means right here and right now to live a respectful, meaningful, faithful life. Here, now. The call to holy living is linked with previous verses in 1 Peter about God's grace and mercy. So we're not just left floundering on our own trying to figure this out and do it by our own power. It'd be pretty overwhelming if we were solely responsible. The idea of living a respectable, moral life without support, well, I don't know how it would do. But we have the Spirit as our constant companion and guide. And we also have each other, those of us in our faith community and other people too, to help us in navigating this challenging path of living a good and moral life. So I want you to think about 2 questions. The first is, what is there in your life that you're currently doing, maybe a habit, that does not fall into the category of holy living? We all have something. We all have more than one something. You know, it may be gossiping, being critical of others, coveting other people, what they have, harboring anger or hatred in your heart, or any number of things. Think about it and ask God to help you with it. Additionally, you can talk to others about it, maybe people who have had the same struggle. Talk about what's helped them, or how you can help each other. The second thing I want you to think about is, in what ways are you living in an upright, holy, faithful manner? They're there. You might not be in touch with them, but they're there for all of us. There is good and sacredness inside of every person. So my prayer is that you will recognize those things and be strengthened and encouraged, find hope in them. So whatever your life circumstance may be, there's some stuff inside that could use growth. and there's also stuff inside that's just really good and wonderful, just as it is. So I hope you have enjoyed this little outing to Castle Island. It's actually getting to be in the later afternoon now, so I'm gonna take one last walk around. And it is lovely to see all of you until we meet again. Many blessings.